Hey, what's good everybody? Welcome back to another video. Today I have an exciting presentation for you, which is going to be covering Bitwig 3.3. Before we get started, welcome to the channel. If this is your first time, I've got a website up above where you can support me by checking out some products that I have for offer. Some of them are free. And I also would appreciate any kind of interactions that you can have within the channel, likes, follows, subscriptions, memberships, all that other stuff. Cool, let's go ahead and get down to business. Bitwig 3.3 beta just released. It's pretty stable, so if you're wondering like, oh, should I update or not? If you have the upgrade plan, then I think that it's okay for now. I haven't had too many problems with it, but that's kind of at your own discretion. The feature list that is on this is pretty substantial, and it added one big feature in particular that I'm really excited about, but we'll talk about that when the time comes. So what is new in Bitwig 3.3? So the first thing that we have here is a step skip in the Arpeggiator, and what this allows us to do in a nutshell is skip some of the steps that you have. So if I have a melody that sounds like this, and I wanted to skip some of these, let's say every other one, then it would play like this. This becomes especially handy when you're looking for some melody variation within your tune by maybe adding something like a randomizer here on the skip steps here, so that way this will play on and off eventually or at random. Which is kind of neat if you're looking for some different kind of variation and you kind of have an idea started, but you're not really sure about what you kind of want to do. So speaking of, if you look over here to the left, we've got these little boxes now that introduce a new kind of like behavior or influence pattern of the modulators that you have. This is a pretty significant update because we can choose between all of these different algorithms in order to influence the modular pattern. So the reason why this matters to me is because if I have a modulator on here, particularly a randomizer, you have two different settings and everything in between that you can switch in between from. But if I wanted this to do more, or I wanted to introduce a particular bias towards that, I can use the algorithm in here to kind of influence certain curvatures between the shapes that I'm already using between the randomizer. If that made no sense to you, it's totally okay. It just means that I have a little bit more control over the randomizer in general. And when you get used to that, by all means, you'll see what I mean. So yeah, this is something that's really cool to me. The next thing that we have, which is also really cool, is the new Edo mode within the micro tuning. Shout out to M for helping me figure out how to translate that. But what this is, typically in Western music, you have 12 intervals that are divided between 12 beats. And so if you play a C and you look at a piano, then when you go C, in order to get back to C, you go up 12 notes or down 12 notes. Well, this kind of breaks that typical harmony division by allowing you to pick a root key, set the amount of divisions you want, and set the distance of intervals in between. So if I wanted to have a new type of, let's say, quote unquote piano, where I wanted 18 intervals that are divided between 16 divisions, then that means that a new kind of like scale pattern or a new note pattern would be 16 different notes. So whatever those tones are in between. And what you end up getting is some really cool and interesting kind of detuned notes that normally you would never find if you were to just play piano, since piano can't do pitch bending or anything like that in between. If I were to turn this off, or let me play F, and if I turn this off, it's a little bit larger of a thing, but you end up getting some cool stuff within that. Okay, so what we have here is the vibrato modulator, and what this allows us to do is kind of save a few steps by not having to grab an LFO if we wanted to add vibrato to something else or anything else in particular. It is an LFO, but we can grab this and kind of save a few extra steps by just kind of clicking on some of the parameters in order to set this up. The speed of the vibrato is here. We also have the shape of the curve of the vibrato. This is kind of how long it takes in order for the vibrato to actually activate, and then we also have a fade in. The thing that's cool about this is that here we have 3 different modes that we can select in order for the mod or the vibrato to start to activate. The mod wheel, the pressure if you have an MPE device, and then also manual, which is what I'm going to do because I don't have a MIDI controller. So if I were to turn this off, you can see that right here is the curve. I'm going to slow this down a little bit too, and as I start to introduce this, you will hear the pitch bending. You can change the speed. And then here you kind of have some envelope controls to where you can kind of set this to come in a little bit longer. And then if you wanted this to be a little bit more smooth, then you can introduce the fade in here. And so that way it gets bigger over time as opposed to kind of on and off. That's pretty much it for the vibrato modulator. It's pretty nifty if you like creating cool leads and stuff. And the next modulator that we have is the ramp. So by default, the ramp mod is turned off and it is pretty much an exponential value that goes from 0 to 100. You can turn the loop mode on if you want to set this and turn it into somewhat an LFO. You can also change the curve here. If you click the button right here, you can go from up to down in such a way, and that's pretty nifty. And then right here, you have the speed at which you can change. So if I were to play this here, I can turn this off. And then I can also set the speed. Now, in order for this to actually change speed in the way that I just did, the LFO has to finish its shape. So it's not going to necessarily update in real time. It's going to update via like start and end of a cycle. So if you want to change it in that way, you need to be mindful of that. However, while this is really cool, one feature that I feel like it's missing is the ability to change this into like an actual beat value or in something in relation to the tempo of your tune. Because, I mean, abstract and experimental sound design or whatever, this doesn't become useful as an actual LFO. So I would probably reach for a regular LFO still because I wanted to do something of that nature. It's still pretty cool, and I think it's a good idea, but I think it needs to be expanded on a little bit. The next big update that we have is kind of what we've been messing with here, which is Polymer. Polymer is a combination between the grid and also just a regular built-in synth. And I think what it's designed to do is help teach you how to get used to seeing the modules in the grid and also have a parallel view of what it would look like if you're turning knobs and stuff here. You have two oscillators. One is a wavetable, or sorry, one is in between a wavetable and all these other modes. The other one is a sub here. You've got different filter types in this section. You have a filter envelope section, and then you've got some actual envelope sections for the actual sound itself with a high pass filter over here at the end. Now, I think one really cool thing that would make this so much better is having the ability to do something kind of like snap-in modules to where you can have more than one either effect or modulator or something here that you can snap in here that will become in relation to the grid. And what that would do is really help the person see how something fits in and how to route, where like I just feel like that could be an amazing teaching tool. It's not to say that this is bad by any means. I just see a lot of opportunity within that I think people would really like if you could do that. The biggest thing in addition to Polymer is the introduction to Wavetable, which is also available in the Polygrid, which we'll look at in a second. But what this allows us to do is upload a wavetable. If you want to import your own, then you can, grab whatever wavetable folder you have, either from Kilohearts or from Serum, and it will upload wave files into this. Between that, you also have a sub oscillator down at the bottom to where you can use this to apply phase modulation. If you turn the sub on and you actually activate that, then what it will do is it will pretty much kind of move back and forth between the two. Even if everything is turned on, you still get a little bit of different movement through this, but it will be important for you to experiment within here. There's different oscillator types that you have within this, and then you also have a noise generator, which is also kind of nice. That will send through to your filter types. Once you kind of have an idea for all this, unfortunately, while you can't change hardly anything within here in particular, you can go here and right click and convert this into a polygrid. So if we open this back up, now we can start adding all of our modulators and stuff with all of the original characteristics preserved within this. So one example that I have is over here, and this is some cool features that I wanted to talk about with Wavetables specifically. So the first thing is that this is like one of the most unique features about Bitwig, or about Bitwig's Wavetable, is the fact that you can play multiple parts of the cycle of a wavetable at once. So instead of only being able to drag through the cycle like this, even if you have a bunch of different voices on here, with this knob here, if something is modulating it, then you can actually play in between those. And that is a really cool thing. It's almost like having a bunch of detuned different oscillators playing at once, and that will allow you to do some really cool stuff kind of like this, which is pretty sick. Over here, if you take a look at this little Unison thing right here, we have different choices between our Unison modes. So you can go between 3, 5, 7, 16, and then you also have 3 different, voicing types between fat, focused, and complex. If you're wondering what those are, you can read the description at the bottom there, where this one says creates unique beating between voices and retriggers smoothly. But you can also control the detune and spread here between all that stuff. It works pretty well in my opinion, and I really enjoy how some of this sounds, especially with some of the really strong wavetables that are built in. Kind of as I said before, over here on the left side, you have your phase modulation amount, and this becomes pretty substantial when you start adding different modulations between wavetables or oscillators on there, because you can pretty much create an infinite amount of FM types and so forth. And I feel like the characteristics lead to stuff that sounds really good, at least the experience that I have. And then again, you can set this to not only do phase modulation, but you can also take the same output, say from something like a sampler, and also set this to start to change the cycles here, or the index modulation is what they call it. So this is really important to me, and I think this is great, because imagine having some kind of granular sample here, and I'm just going to kind of talk about it concept-wise, otherwise this video is going to take forever, but imagine if you could do something like that here, and then you are starting to randomize and automate the different phase modulations between that. The routing capabilities, I think, have jumped so much more. There's so much more potential added just from having the ability to have a dedicated phase modulation knob. I do still wish that they would add that same feature to here on the sampler, because I think that would be cool to see what you could do by FMing granular stuff with different wavetables as opposed to just regular FM like you can do in Ableton's sampler. But then again, the sampler in Ableton isn't a granular engine, it's just a sampler playback mode. So imagine being able to actually FM granular stuff, right? That would be pretty awesome. Hope Bitwig is watching this. So yeah, that's pretty much it for the Wavetable and Polymer. I think that both are pretty cool additions, especially if you're new to sound design. It's a great way to bridge the gap between the two. But we're not done with our features. The next one that I have is potentially the biggest and most important feature within this. And finally, I am pleased to announce, not formally, but I'm so happy to tell you that Bitwig now supports free scaling or time warping, time stretching on the timeline. Yes. So the way that this works is you highlight over here until you see this little icon, you hold Option, and then you just click and drag, and there you go. So one important thing that was omitted from this, which is kind of strange, is that if I set this to loop, and let's say I have a recording channel to where I wanted to do granular recording in this way, if I hold Option, or if I play this, and I hold Option and I pull this out, it won't change until I take the buttons off of the mouse and keyboard. Whereas if I change the tempo here while this is playing, it will do it in real time. So it's not that big of a deal, but it is something to be mindful of. And I don't know if it was overlooked or if there was some kind of complication within that, but I would like to be able to kind of time stretch this in real time while I'm recording to a new channel or something, because that would be pretty interesting. And again, if you were able to add the ability to modulate the tempo or modulate the different warp modes, man, that'd be awesome. Anyways, the next feature that we have is the new fade modes that you can do. If you have a sample, let's say that starts from here, and you click over here, you can actually extend the fade so that way it's actually hitting at the right time before. And this will help you kind of remove some of the clicks and stuff that I think, you know, can be cumbersome in general. Likewise, if you have a split clip and you want to fade in between, you can grab this right here, and this will actually adjust where this wants to fade within these two samples. And then you can also adjust these fades up here to where you won't actually cut out of the sound when these are starting to fade in between each other in general. And so this isn't really something that I do a whole lot of because I usually worry about like phase and stuff, especially with basses and all that. But if you want a seamless transition between these, then I think that can help a lot. It's there a little bit, so maybe if we made the fade a little bit longer. Yeah, it's pretty seamless now. So go ahead and explore with that and have some fun with it if you like doing like maybe different melody cuts and stuff in general. Also within the new sample and fade modes, what you can do is if you highlight over here, you can actually adjust the volume of these in general, which can be pretty handy if you want to just change this without having to go into the inspector view. So the last thing that I want to talk about is over here to the right. If we go into the sections mode, we have the new arrange cue markers. And what this does is it allows us to jump in between our different cue markers that we have set up between these. So if you look at the playhead right here, we're on section A, and then if I jump to section B, it will start to play from here as well. There's another really cool potential feature that I would like to see added to this, because I do think it's a great idea, especially for not having to go over here and click on this. You can just jump in this way. But imagine if you can take all of the data that's recorded on these little divisions that you have and move them and interchange them in between, almost like a similar section of like session view, right? I don't know how difficult that would be to implement, but I feel like if you can highlight everything and drag it over anyways, I don't think that it would be too much of a stretch to say, all right, I want to take everything from this section and rearrange it to this section and kind of play with my arrangements in such a way, which could be really cool for non-linear design. Like let's say as opposed to putting this all together, I wanted to have like main section A version 2, version 3, and then I can just go over here and move these interchangeably and say, okay, well, I think that this version is the best one. Not everybody works in that workflow mindset, but it's something that I think could be a potential game changer, or something that would be very handy to use when you're trying to explore with song creation outside of having to do it in session view, right? Because it makes sense in session view or within the clip launcher view of being like, well, these are all just chunks and I can rearrange the chunks. But if you have like a full list of automation or a full thing that has all that recording in between, you know, all the nuances and stuff, and then you can do that, that would be a much bigger thing. So yeah, I think that's everything that I wanted to cover within this. Thank you guys so much for watching this content. I really appreciate your time, and hopefully this was concise enough for you all to get what you needed out of it. But aside from all that, check out my website, and I will see you guys in the next video.